Bryan, here we go. All right. So Bryan spent 12 years running Exactuals, City National Bank's fintech payments platform. You know, you've spent 12 years building this fintech inside one of America's largest banks. Then you walked away to fix something that you bumped into in your own family. Curious to know the moment when you realized this was like a meaningful problem to like step away and solve. And like, I'm curious a little bit what that felt like, both as an entrepreneur founder, kind of looking to solve something that you didn't see solved in the space, but also from your lived experience.
Caleb, I appreciate that question. Thanks very much for having me. There's a couple different origin stories for Forward Inheritance, which is the company I now help lead. And I think I can give you, call it a couple different points. One, the one I really knew was a few years ago, there was enough jazz happening in my family where I had to look my father, my hero, in the eye and be like, "Hey, Pops, where's the will?" And he's like, "It's fine, pal." And I'm like, "Buddy, we're past the it's fine time. Can you please hand me the documentation?" And he was like, "Oh." And so that was a wild moment, Caleb, for a couple of reasons. One, it's wild when the role reversal happens with your parents, right? And mom and dad who got us here and our heroes and, you know, all the people that came before us. And all of a sudden you realize, oh, you're in charge. Like I was like, oh, I'm in charge because do I trust them to pick the restaurant and to drive us there? Should they be handling legal paperwork? Like that's a wild moment to sit in. And my son's gonna have the same, my daughter and son are gonna have the same moment with me, right? This is the cycle of life. As you noted, I was the CEO of Exactuals, and I'd had a great career and it was a ton of fun, and I'm very fortunate, Caleb. I grew up in Southern California to a loving family. My mother died when I was very young. My father kept us together. I have 3 beautiful sisters, had a good career, and I looked around and I was like, I don't think my family's at all prepared for what's about to happen. And if I'm in this state, Caleb, what's everyone else in? My father's a former litigator, right? And there's like an 8th Amendment on, you know, I was like, "Pops, is that an 8th Amendment on the will?" And he's like, "No, it's an 8th Amendment on the prenup." And I was like, oh, good God. Like, oh, good God. And then, sorry, I'm not trying to monologue at the beginning. I was like, well, where do I store this stuff? And I was like, I shouldn't have this in Google Drive. And I looked around at the options available, and none of them are for the family. Some are built for wealth managers, some are built for insurance folks, some are built for, you know, other professionals, estate attorneys, and that's awesome. But who loves the family, Caleb? And that's why we started Forward Inheritance, is to allow families to grow and prosper and to protect their estate, protect their legacy, and ensure that there is money for the family at the end of the day. That's why, Caleb.
Can you just take that one step further and help me understand, almost like I'm explaining it to like one of my, you know, like I'm in grade 6, but understand like, hey, the document, you know, goes from here, it's going to live here, so-and-so can log in, et cetera. You set those permissions. Is there a way to explain it like super simple for myself?
Look, for all of us, Caleb, and that's the thing, we're all in this, and no one actually explains this to people. I didn't know. So there are some fundamentals that every family should probably follow, and then you can always get fancy at the edges. Cool? So some of the fundamentals. Where's the will? Do you have a will? Do you need a will? Is the will current, right? When was the last time it was dusted off and said, yeah, I still believe in all of those things? When are the named people in the will, are they still alive or are they not alive? So get a will. That should tell everybody what your intentions are. You know, whatever, split it 50-50, everything should go to my kids, go to this much to charity, etc. Your will is your intentions. Cool. Then you need, many families need a trust. And why do you need a trust? A trust is a different legal entity that is separate from the will. It's a separate legal document. And that is to ensure that your assets are tax advantaged, right? So you don't, and that ownership of the asset is not in doubt. As in, if I die without a will, my family home goes to the state of California in the probate process, which is a super rational thing to have, right, Caleb? Like, hey, if you don't know what to do with it, let's give it to the state, and the state will hold it in trust until they figure it out, right? Well, probate, man, you're going for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. You're wasting 20, 30, 50% of the value of the assets that are in probate. And you got to go fight with your state government that that's your family home. Man. Or your family bank account or your family asset, whatever that is, right? So a trust not only needs to exist, but it needs to be funded. I had no idea what that meant. Man, I grew up in Southern California. I look like this I had no idea what fund your trust meant. I have to change the title of, like, my home is not owned by me. My home is owned by the Bryan T. Walley Trust of 2024 or whatever the title is, right? Fine. Same with my bank accounts, right? Same with my businesses, etc. It's all in the trust. And what that does is ensure that if and when I die, that my children, there's no question, legal question on who owns this thing. In fact, me dying actually, I mean, of course it impacts it, but it doesn't impact it. The trust owns these assets, not me, right? The third thing I would submit you need to have is a power of attorney for medical decisions and power of attorney for financial decisions. What happens when mom falls and breaks her hip? Who's in charge? What happens when dad gets a dementia diagnosis? Who's in charge? Who can be in charge? If you do not have a power of attorney for medical decisions for mom and dad in the state in which they reside, not you reside. So if mom and dad live in Florida, you need a power of attorney that's good in the state of Florida, not necessarily, state of California, so that you can be involved in their medical decisions. Because if not, the doctor's making that call for you. If not, the banker's making that call for you. If not, the lawyer's making that call for you, right? And so after that, I would then submit, you need an accounting of your assets, what exists, what doesn't exist, right? What are they valued at, and an accounting of their liabilities. You start with those 5 fundamental things, Caleb, you're probably gonna be generally covered. And then of course you can get fancy over time. But that's really where I think every family can, should, and will start. Let's get a will, let's get a trust, let's get the power of attorneys in, let's make sure we document the assets, and let's make sure we're honest with the liabilities so we have a good, clean accounting of what is in the estate.
If you had to guess, what percentage of people do you think have a trust?
I don't even have to guess. I'm just going to say it's publicly available data says that 50% of homeowners do not have a will. Think about that for a second. 50% of homeowners in America do not have a will. There will not be a great wealth transfer. There will be a great probate. Like, do we want to give all of our money back to the government? Do we want to waste our time and our energy fighting with states that is our family asset? It's going to take a little bit of paperwork and a little bit of adulting today, Caleb, but harder now, easier later. Easier now, harder later. These are themes in all of our lives. And without doing a little bit of work today, you're going to have a paperwork crisis amongst the estate chaos, and the inheritance will be destroyed. Man, I wish I didn't sound so doom and gloom, but Bud, that's the answer. So half of homeowners don't have a will. And I would submit arguably half don't have a trust either.
So do you find people are, there's a couple things I'm curious about. One is the point of traction, like what is the catalyst a lot of the time that where it current, is in a reality state, which is probably more problematic. It should be earlier. That's one curiosity, but I'm actually probably more interested in where should the catalyst be? What context? How is that framed? And I'm wondering if from an emotional standpoint almost, or I don't know if that's the best word, but like where's the organic entry point in a conversation in a family to be able to bring that up? Because, obviously the signal that comes across to, dad or mom with that is like, hey, why would you be asking that? Wait, what's going on? Is it, and you start to, that idea of what, do I look sick? Do I, is there, why would you be asking that? So is there something that you found that is a more seamless way, natural way that's not, doesn't create friction?
Yeah, fair. I think the word that you're probably bouncing around is greed, right? So let's just name it and be like, okay, right? Do the kids look greedy asking about this? And the actual answer is it about money, Caleb? Like, of course, but don't make it about the money. The money's the outcome. It's the result. It is not the reason. It is not the purpose. So to answer your question, we offer, tips on, here's 5 conversation starters to talk about the estate that has nothing to do with money. And so some of those Caleb's are things like, look, after my divorce, I had to go get a new trust, right? So I got my trust, and that's a very easy way for me then to look at my father, who's now 81, and go, Pops, I just got a trust. Do you have one? Where is it? That's a simple question. I'm obviously asking about the estate, but that is not an attack. That is not greed. That is just, I had to go through this. Have you done that before? That's interesting. I had to go get a power of attorney for my son who's turning 18 so that I can be part of his medical decisions when he goes off to college. That's a wild thing to think about as well, right? I need power of attorneys up and down, because I'm in the sandwich generation. Caleb, we are the sandwich generation, right? So it's ways to talk about the process and how we're going about it, as opposed to the outcome, which is the money. Because here's the thing: without proper planning, paperwork, and process, there will be no or definitely less money, right? So yes, ultimately, everyone understands we're trying to preserve legacy here and trying to keep the family wealth, right? I think there's a fundamental human and probably life force desire to give the next generation a better life than was given to us, right? We're always trying to evolve and do better, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, money's a part of that. Money's the outcome. It's, are we planned well? Does everyone know that, is the paperwork aligned? Are we running the business of the family like a business, right? Or are we just, hey, YOLOing that thing? It's not great.
Yeah, it's
the data
interesting
isn't great
because,
here, but we can help.
the logic of waiting is actually counterintuitive, because actually the longer you wait, the closer to the end it becomes for everybody, so actually, and then the closer to the end, it becomes more awkward, because then it's actually closer. So actually you'll never be younger than you are today is actually more of that. But I love the way that you put it. And I feel like it's such a valuable perspective, is actually like, get your own house in order. And in doing that, hey, we revisited our will, this past weekend, and then bringing it up that way, there's a conversation recently I had with someone about the benefits of creatine from a cognitive standpoint, avoiding to prevent things like dementia and whatnot. And
Yeah.
I, had brought it up with someone who's a little bit older. And when I mentioned it, I feel like this person's probably 20, 30 years of life left in him, like really strong, healthy, whatever. But I noticed that there was a point in the conversation that I really hadn't anticipated as I brought it up. I was like, hey, this feels like a really great, something to add into the mix that can help prevent dementia. And I could almost see the math, almost see the gears turning of going like, hey, why would they be asking me that question? And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And I thought after, I was like, oh, I wonder if leading with the fact that I have creatine in my diet as part of a discipline, part of a, some, just a bit of routine for that purpose, So, but having it framed from the perspective of yourself, I think seems like a more gentle way to go about it.
Yeah, and Caleb, really there's 2 points here. First of all, I love my daily creatine to go with my AG1. I love my Momentous. I'm just going to pitch those because they're great. Fair, right? So I'm with you, and I do it for that exact reason. I'm trying to give myself the longest probability of hanging out with my own children for as long as possible and in the best way possible. But you can think about, if we want to get into mom and dad's finances, mom and dad are living longer, which is awesome, right? Which means we get to spend more time with them, which is awesome. But let's take a step back and say, what's the implication of that? It means that we're going to need more money for housing, for food, for medical situations going forward. Do mom and dad have enough money to ride off into the sunset the way they deserve? Caleb, that's an interesting question. And it can start with creatine, but what we're really talking about is longevity and how we are living longer. And do we have the financial means to take care of mom and dad the way they want to, right? So like, this is all interrelated, Caleb. And yes, getting your own house in order allows you to have a conversation of, oh, and what about you, mom and dad? How are we doing this so that we can all live well and we can honor the legacy that they've built, is really where it comes down to for me.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Sometimes it's neat when there's an annual for anything. People, I think of spring cleaning. People, I don't know who coined that, but it's like, oh, spring cleaning. It's an interesting way to just annually do a deep cleanse. And, certainly having certain holidays on the calendar is just a reason to get people in the same town, community, in the same room together around a table. It's interesting when there are those things that are just sort of like a norm. And I wonder if whether it's spoken of officially or if it's just that we did our annual update, to the will. And one of the things we were thinking about is we shifted this with our trust. We learned this about it. And so we've actually added this to it, or actually bringing that up, having it be more of a common aspect of conversation with loved ones, maybe would help to remove some of the stigma around, some of these discussions.
Spot on. So I talk a lot about that the business of the family needs to be run like a business. that is an annual board meeting or quarterly business reviews, or right. So like that kind of a mechanism to look at the paperwork and make sure everything's kosher. The flip of that is, or what we do at Forward Inheritance to help with that, is every family on the platform, to your point, spring cleaning. We have a spring cleaning module, for lack of a better term, or ritual, where we will go in and say, let's look at the sheet of paper that has mom and dad's doctor and lawyer and accountant and executor and. Hey, is that still your executor? Are they still alive? Most people's executors, right, are their age. It's a fair question. So that spring cleaning, Caleb, where you can go through and say, is this, just dust it off, make sure it all is still okay. And they go, yeah, we're probably still good for another year. And then we can post it securely online and share it with the family members and the professionals that help run the business of the family, your estate attorney, your tax accountant, your wealth advisor, that kind of a thing, so that everybody knows the plan. So that when we all get that terrible phone call and we have that surprise Wednesday, there is not a paperwork crisis, a mix, like a coupling or compounding an already complex and emotional situation, right? So yeah, Caleb, I think that daily ritual or that annual ritual will help, I'll call it destigmatize it, for lack of a better term, or normalize it, maybe is a better way to say it. Because these are things we need to do for ourselves and for our parents and for the next generation. We owe it to them, I think.
Yeah, we worked for a number of years with one of the largest privately owned funeral, like end of life care. Well, not end of life care, funeral homes, and it was really fascinating to. The learning a lot more about the industry and seeing how they operated from an ethical standpoint. There's so many shady things that. I'm sure they exist in different industries, but to hear about what was, some of the majors, these big, really corporations, publicly traded, some of them, how just some of the pressure, I think that you're optimizing for sales and volume and numbers, but at what cost, and at what time are these people making these decisions? But hearing story after story of situations where people, did not have things organized, but seeing the reverse is when things are really well organized and planned, and certainly, a trust being one of them, but also having arrangements in that will, and, often even looked after in advance of how you would want to be remembered, was just really eye-opening to see how it can be such a beautiful, the term celebration of life gets used a lot. I think that the actual phrase of it does have some merit in terms of like actually being able to reflect on, something that's, such a great treasure. There was a phrase that I remember when we were first working with the brand and doing discovery and trying to understand, like, you want to hone in and get to the exact point. It's like you're trying to find, there's water on the property. You're like, where's the spring?
Yeah,
and
sure.
I remember getting to the point, and it was these words that kind of came together for me, was that, death is so hard because life is so valuable. And that's the reason. It's actually, and when you look at it from that perspective, is the amount of pain and that people want to push away from it so difficult. It's like, that is so hard because of this. And when that shift happened, it was beautiful because the unlock for that brand was we got to talk about, well, a lot of other funeral homes, a lot of what they would talk about, the messaging, et cetera, was talking about this. We were like, nope, this is what you do. This is where the conversation is. And even at a funeral, this is where the conversation should be, because as much as we remember the person and they're gathered and there's time for stories and whatnot, really what should be happening is it's shoulder to shoulder, it's breaking bread, it's sitting, and it's whatever the difference is, may or may not be there, whatever the distance may, whatever it may be, to recognize how immense it is of a treasure to see that sunshine, to get to feel that embrace, all of those things, that sip of water, that so many things that are just so common, and how much of a treasure it is. So, but to live in that. And I love the way that you've reframed it in my mind. And I feel like it's one of those things, once you've heard it, you can't unhear it, is that idea of, really looking at it first from a perspective of how you get your own things in order, and then are able to much more naturally bring it up with others.
You said many beautiful things there, Caleb, and going to try to touch on them in some semblance of an order. I think Families tend to have the estate conversation in one of three places. They can do it at their kitchen table, they can do it over a hospital bed, or they can do it at the funeral home. Like, take your pick, man. You're going to have this conversation one way or the other, and you choose where you and your family are going to have this conversation, right? Easier now, harder later. Harder now, easier later. When you do the work early, like you were saying, you get to have that celebration of life. You get to have that calm. What is compassion? Compassion is sitting in it with somebody else with passion, right? And being able to sit with family members and friends and really celebrate what will never happen again, right? That life is no longer here. I lost my mother when I was young, and that is a hole in my heart that will never be filled, right? And I think a lot of that compassion comes to how we approach forward inheritance and how we help families have these communications and have these better dialogues so that we can have better family wealth, better family outcomes, better estate planning, better insurance. That's all after. That's the result. That's the money, to go back to it, right? But the process of it, Caleb, we can do this better. We can help each other. And as we do that, we're going to have less families fighting each other over money they didn't earn. Wild. Like, everybody's better. Everybody's better. We can do this. We can do this.
So what markets do you serve? Who would you're in the state of California. Is it across the US? Is this international?
So yes, so the platform is across the United States. And I'm even going to say, look, there are regulatory nuances and laws, and I'm not going to pretend to be good at all of them, but I bet you Canada and the UK and Spain and China, look, fundamentally, you probably need some legal documents. You need to account for your assets. And yeah, there's going to be nuances in maybe the form or what have you, but generally speaking, we could be global. We're multi-language, all that kind of stuff. You just start in your own backyard, and there's so much opportunity here in America, especially with the great wealth transfers. That's why we started here. But we could go international. That's not a problem.
Awesome. So for anyone that wants to check it out, what's the first step? Visit the website, and then is there a first step that you would suggest?
Yeah. So it is forwardinheritance.com. And we have a demo of our site, or of our app, if you will, up there. We also have resources like 5 conversation starters to have with your parents that is nothing about money. We offer those for free because we think it's the right thing to do. And so, you can come in, you can sign up not only your own family, Caleb, you can sign up your parents' estate next, and have 2 estates, and we can manage both of those for you. Because some parents are not computer literate or will not want to face this, but that doesn't mean the organization doesn't need to happen. It could be, hey, let's organize it on behalf of mom and dad and make sure they are, head of household and invited. It's their money, it's their estate, it's their legal documents, but we can handle that situation. Caleb, at the end of the day, this typically falls on like a 50-year-old mom who's emotionally has to support the aging parents and probably has kids in high school and college. That's our ideal client profile. Because we're all in it, Caleb. We're all in this sandwich generation and just trying to help. And yeah.
So important. So, well, I feel like almost everybody, it maybe not the topic that people feel like they would want to necessarily, add to their list of things to do, but I feel like you've set the table in a very inviting and sounds like a very streamlined way to do so. So, Bryan, thank you so much for sharing it. I'll close off the recording, and then we'll have a second to chat before we jump.
Caleb,
Awesome.
this was
Thanks,
an
Bryan.
absolute honor. Thank you, man. Thank you.